species be lost forever.
On the
If
horizon.
you'd like to discover more of Altamira's secrets, you can once again support the Refugium graphic novel on
Yeah, go out there
Kickstarter
with
using
me.
the links
Let a
below.
pond, my
Simon
gallo.
Roy actually has numerous interconnected stories set upon Altamira and in the surrounding galaxy, which you can also learn more about in the video's description.
Drop those
And this
targets,
video
take the
featured a
boats, and
lot of
bang.
art from SpecBio creators who have been featured elsewhere on this channel, so there are links to follow and support them as well. And as always, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this entry, please lend your support by liking, subscribing, and hitting the notification icon to stay up to date on all things curious. See you in the next video.
Which requires an unbroken string of 735-year reigns on average. That is a royal runtime matched by only 2 emperors before the fall of Western Rome. And yes, that of all things is where I draw the realism line. Because each segment of this story feels abundantly retrofitted to clean up a messy set of chronologies between key events. The well-known establishment of the Republic in 509, the vaguely understood foundation of the city in the mid-700s-ish, and the heavily mythologized Trojan origins of Aeneas back in the Bronze Age. Everything else is just narrative scaffolding. Republican-era Romans wondered aloud how exactly their history could fit 2 founders in the same cult tradition, and it took until the Augustan period to square all that by having Aeneas found the Roman dynasty and Romulus build the city itself. Other classical states didn't struggle as much with contradicting narratives. Athens certainly didn't mind having multiple founder heroes, and one of them was Theseus. Ugh. But in the 1st century BC, Rome took an organic storytelling tradition and forced all those disparate threads to play by history's rules. One continuous narrative. It didn't need to be what we would call factual, it just needed to fit. Of course the Alban kings were retconned into existence to tidy up the timeline. Aeneas and Romulus are the only 2 who narratively matter. Those legendary origins only needed to make sense to the Romans, and in the absence of records from before Rome's first sack in 390 BC, that's the closest thing to a primary source we have. As pure history, it's bound to leave us wanting anything more substantive, but as an artifact of their culture, this origin tells us everything the Romans needed to know about themselves and wanted anyone else to know. Their heroes are divine descendants of Venus and Mars. Their lineage runs back as far as anywhere in Greece. They come from disparate places and backgrounds. Civil war is in their blood. They 100% have a wolf kink, and they kill tyrants. That's Rome. Everything else is Livy's filler arcs. Now, for a supposedly ancient story, 2 of Romulus' deeds point decidedly forwards in Roman history and reveal what later Romans thought must have been intrinsic to their identity. His first act as king was to welcome Italy's dispossessed and outlaws as Rome's citizens, which may seem rather unheroic on the face of it, but this reflects Rome's most peculiar trait, its openness to cultures and people. Rome, of course, thought that it was the best civilization ever, and made that known loudly and frequently, but Rome took good ideas wherever they found them, and was willing to let any barbarian become Roman so long as they took on Rome's customs and learned Latin. Romans always started as outsiders, be they exiles from across Italy or refugees from far off Troy, supposedly. Rome was also remarkably comfortable with granting citizenship to freed slaves, a quality the Greeks absolutely did not share. This seemingly undignified story actually enshrines the idea that regardless of social class or cultural boundaries, it was possible to become a Roman. And that idea is the stuff that pan-Mediterranean civilizations are made of. But alongside Rome's great aspirations, their deepest anxiety is also present in the Romulus story, as their ruinously blood-soaked hobby of civil wars finds its start in that fratricidal founder. Rather than being intended as justification to go out murdering, as if they needed that, this looks like the closest thing to Rome's original sin, the foundational crime they will be doomed to repeat over and over and over and over and over for more than 2,000 years. These stories take their most permanent form 7 centuries after the supposed founding of the city in the pages of Livy's History of Rome and Virgil's Aeneid. And as we wait for potential discoveries in archaeology to illuminate the earliest settlements amid those hills beside the Tiber, that's all we've got to go on. The image sharpens in the historical focus as we depose King Tarquin start the Republic and embark on the slow process of building Rome's civic institutions and establishing a domain across central Italy, but the further we progress along the timeline, the more meaningful and relevant their origin story becomes. The roots of Rome ultimately tell us nothing about the earliest Romans, if they even called themselves Romans, even came from Troy, even had kings, even did any of the things their myths take for granted. But this narrative reveals so much about the civilization they would become and the kind of people the Romans would one day be. Crafty bastards. As the next 2,000 years will amply demonstrate, they were crafty bastards. What's important to keep in mind as we start laying down more and more red paint on this lovely marble map is that Rome did not begin with a grand plan of conquest. Rather, after shaking off Etruscan domineering and suffering their first major incursion of the Gauls in 390 by Brennus, the Romans needed to fortify their territory by pacifying threats at their frontier. Simply put, this process began and never finished. Individuals had their social or political motives for participating, but at scale, this doctrine of expanding defense just kept on expanding. Rome did not have some 53.5-step plan for Mediterranean domination imposed from the top, but a set of priorities which successive generations inherited and renewed. This defensively expansionist military philosophy carved through Etruria, Samnia, Magna Graecia, Carthage, Macedonia, Gaul, Syria, Egypt, Germania, and Parthia. There would always be another enemy to fear. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Rome handled its enemies one at a time, and so will we. A majority of Rome's early history was simply a spirited back and forth between its neighbors, the Etruscans to the north, the Samnites to the south, and later on, the Greek colonies of Magna Graecia to the way further south. And by spirited, I do literally mean they were stabbing each other with spears. While all of this neighborly murdery business was going on, the city of Rome was building itself up both physically and institutionally. Walls, streets, a sewer system, stone temples and buildings, a governmental system reminiscent of the Greek polis system, and a religious system reminiscent of the Greek pantheon. Man, that Greek influence really got in there early. Institutionally speaking, by the time they kicked out Tarquin and swore never to have a king again, a lot of the mechanics of the Republic were already in place, like the Senate, the patrician nobility, and the citizen assembly. The transition to a republic was really more of a reorganization of authority than a political revolution or anything like that. Broadly speaking, the whole idea was to take their government and publicize the power so that people could participate, and the word republic comes from the Latin res publica, which just means public thing. Structurally, the government was controlled by two annually elected consuls, the praetors ran the justice system, and the quaestors, the silliest Roman name ever, managed state finances. The aediles were responsible for the state of the city, so they handled food, games, infrastructure, all that jazz. The Senate, though it didn't technically legislate anything, published opinions on policy that were